You can start, Ali.
Okay. Very good morning. Today we're here to discuss some of the broader concepts that are being dealt with in the course. So we'll just go over the assignments. I understand that you still have the fourth assignment due. So barring that, we'll discuss the first three assignments and the logic of some of the answers. Some of the questions are straightforward, they're recall questions. So you should be able to draw out the answers just listening to the lectures or doing some extra research on the internet. Some of them do require some working out, which is why we had put in extra lines saying write down for discussion later, and we can have that discussion over the next 2 weeks. So we'll just go over the first assignment to start with. The first question is, which among the following philosophers spoke of eudaimonia? This is a simple recall question. It's Aristotle, and this should ideally not take too much of your time. This assignment is based on the first two lectures. The branch of ethics that addresses the question, what is moral, is normative ethics. Normative ethics talks about an idea, a fixed idea of what is right and what is wrong, and that sort of dictates the idea of a norm. What should we do? What is morally right or wrong? Which is where the term normative ethics comes from. Then we have the statement and what philosophical concept it reflects. The third question is ChatGPT will be responsible for changing the course of college education, is the statement. And what philosophical orientation does this reflect? It reflects a certain kind of determinism. Determinism is an outlook where there is a certain sense of certainty that you associate um, with some kind of introduction of technology, where you say that introducing this technology will change the trajectory of so and so thing, which means that you are certain that technology alone will be responsible for that change, which is why it is deterministic. The next question is a scenario. It's about, it quite literally draws from the example of stealing bread that is discussed in the first lecture. You catch a man stealing bread from a supermarket. You see him walking towards an elderly blind woman to feed her the bread. Looking at the purpose of the stolen bread, you decide not to report theft. Are you in violation of, or is the man in violation of Kant's idea of what is moral? Kant's idea of what is moral essentially boils down to what can be applicable universally, which is why the universality maxim is being discussed. So, morality, according to Kant, is based on duty, and it is something that you would expect everyone to follow, you would want everyone to follow. So the abstraction of this would be to not steal, and that is applicable to everyone, irrespective of the purpose. Even if the man had stolen the bread to feed an elderly woman, the purpose doesn't matter for Kant. It's the fact that there was theft. So, based on that abstraction alone, this man would be in violation of Kant's idea of what counts as moral. So, the answer would be yes, he is in violation. You ask your manager for an advance on your salary and cite your mother's hospital bills as the reason. However, the loan is for your friend who has borrowed money from an informal loan shark and is receiving death threats. So, like the previous example, although you are borrowing money, the reason you're citing would count as untrue or a lie. And according to Kant's universality maxim, this can be abstracted to the moral code of speak truth or something that you would expect everyone else to do. So the ends don't justify um, the means, or Kant is not as worried about how you get to a certain point. So the fact that you did have to lie, irrespective of the purpose, would would fail the universality maximum that Kant talks about. So therefore, it does not pass. So the answer is no for this one. According to affordance theory, and affordance theory is briefly discussed in the second lecture. Affordance theory is essentially at which at this point you should know that it is about how technological artifacts um, provide certain cues or the environment in which the technological system is placed offer possible actions that a person can perform with it. That is what an affordance is, and it need not apply specifically for digital technologies, but it can be um, a door with a push or a pull sign, which means it is directly suggestive about what kind of actions can be performed with the door. So that is roughly what an affordance is. And which of these is not an example of an explicit affordance? An explicit affordance is something that really spells out what you can do with it. A door with a pull or a push sign spells out what you can do with it. So it is an explicit affordance. So that's not it. A button that says volume plus on a stereo system, which quite literally indicates that pressing that button will increase the volume. A prompt on a website that says pay here is the button. If it has spelled out that you have to click this button to pay, it is an explicit affordance. Then a green button to show that someone is online. And this is the correct answer because this is a social cue that we have picked up along the way because there is no explicit reason for us to associate green with online, but that's just something that we have been conditioned to do over time. So therefore, this is the correct answer. This is the one that is not an explicit affordance. The next question is you are required to approve the budget for a multi-specialty hospital that specifically caters to socioeconomically disadvantaged sections. However, the foundation of this building was laid on the land that originally belonged to three freedom fighters. You approve the budget. According to which philosophical framework would your decision be correct? The correct answer for this is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the idea that benefits make sense through this lens when they are for the greatest number of people. And the utilitarianism provides a lens to judge whether an action is good or bad based on its consequences for the maximum number of people. So that is the right answer. You decide to eat, the next question is you decide to eat a chocolate bar that was meant for your brother because you were craving something sweet. Which part, according to Freud, is responsible for this action? And a simple recall question will allow you to answer this. The part is id, which is the part that's responsible. According to Freud, there were three different parts, right? Superego, ego, and id. Id is the part that is responsible for immediate pleasure and satisfaction, and it follows the pleasure principle, and it's the instinctive part of the mind that's responsible for this. Um, the other parts, which are ego and superego, ego is responsible for rationality within a person's mind. It tries to balance the desires that are presented by the id and with the observed reality around a person. Superego is the moral part of the personality, which represents values, morals, social rules that are learned over time from society. So the correct answer is eat. Question 9 is a simple recall question. Who proposed the idea of care of the self? Is Michel Foucault. The lecture or some simple internet research should have given you this answer, ideally. The final question of this assignment is your grandmother and you have been writing emails to each other in Kannada. One day you decide to use only comics in your email instead of words. Is this an example of technology as a cultural phenomenon? Write down why in your notebook. So this draws from the second lecture where technology is discussed along many lines. Technology as things, technology as a cultural phenomena, uh, and many others. You can go back to that slide and reflect. But basically, what we're trying to see is whether or not technology is the point of difference here? The answer is no, because it is not technology. That's the point of difference. You have changed the modality of communication. You have changed you've not changed the medium. You're still writing emails. However, instead of writing emails in Kannada, you have moved to maybe communicating through comics. So the way you communicate is different, but the medium you communicate through, which is a technology, is not different. So therefore, technology is not a cultural phenomena that is creating this gap between the communication. So uh, that's the final question of this assignment. If there are any doubts or clarifications that you require based on this, please feel free to post it on the discussion forum. The other one, the second one, is fairly straightforward assignment as well. It is based on the Smart City lecture, and it's based on the case study that is discussed, the public distribution system. So the first one is a recall question, Richard Sennett, which is a reference that is discussed throughout the Smart Cities lecture. Talks about order, disorder, and disorder in the cityscape, which is why that is the correct answer. The next one is a scenario. It's about Sarita Devi, who is a daily wage laborer. She's unable to get her ration card made using the online portal. So she has to rely on a third person, who is Raju, who helps the village residents make their ration cards for a small fee. This reflects what aspect of the PDS? This reflects the role of intermediaries. Intermediaries are actors that connect beneficiaries to certain services that might otherwise be inaccessible to them for whatever reason. In this case, very apparently, it is the digital divide. There are multiple other factors that influence this inaccessibility, and all of which are discussed in the case study on PDS. So in this particular case, Raju behaves as an intermediary who connects Sarita Devi to the state's services. Therefore, the role of intermediaries is what is reflected. The third question is about a neighborhood in a city that repairs a local park where the citizens take initiative. They pool in resources and establish a park that will be welcome to all and is open for 12 hours a day. Over time, the population of small families with children grew in the neighborhood. Select the most appropriate option for this case. The most appropriate option is that this is an organically occurring and growing outcome proportionate to the capabilities of residents. Because the distribution of responsibilities and actions between the state and the citizens are not as stark in most cases. Of course, the state is to be held accountable for many, many, many things, but this is one of those cases that best reflects how a community builds a common resource and how a community grows based on the building of this common resource. So the third option is the most apt. So assume the fourth question is tests your assumptions on how design is normally studied or looked at. Assume that a place A is abundant in sandstone. Sandstone is a primary material in place A's architecture. So there is a direct correlation between the resource that is available and the kind of architecture that is being designed for place A. So with its groundbreaking design, A's architecture then becomes world-renowned. So what happens after it becomes world-renowned? It starts a process of it sets off a process of replication across the world. However, for the rest of the places, it turns out to be a lot more expensive and tedious. What can you conclude from this case? It's a fairly, I mean, if you've looked at both the smart city lecture and even drawing from the other lectures, you should be able to say that this is a one size fits all design approach that does not work. So you're just trying to say, take something from another context without factoring in what are the realities within which it was created, and you're trying to apply it to a different context, which might not always work. So The answer is it's a one-size-fits-all design issue, as opposed to looking at local resources and designs that work best for uh, that specific context. The fifth one is a fairly straightforward. It's based on Saskia Sassen's conception of censored and censored city. I get why they are difficult because they sound the same, but masking socioeconomic inequalities is basically censoring, like you would censor or not show something. So essentially, Saskia Sassen argues that there are lots of technology and mechanisms that are available that mask or even out the unevenness of the different socioeconomic inequalities that exist in the city, and technology is often used as a tool to do that. So that is the censoring that she talks about in the first half of this. Then the second one is censored in the same way that a sensor connects different devices to a system. It collects information, which basically means that a censored city is always collecting information, and there's always technology that is at the forefront of the governance of the city and the design of the city. So that's what she means when she says censored city. So the correct answer is censored with a C in the first one and censored with an S in the second. Um, Sixth one talks about it's a fairly straightforward recall question, public distribution system. What was not an important takeaway from the case study that was discussed? That beneficiaries receive regular updates on their phones. It's not something that was discussed. The other three have been explicitly spoken about. Seventh one, based on discussions so far, what can be said of top-down governance? This is something that you can draw from based on all the lectures so far. And this is a multi-select option question. One of the options is that unfair representation from marginalized communities is something that happens very often, as you have seen from both the Smart City lecture and the PDS case study. The other one is there is an absence of grievance redressal mechanisms, that there are not many people who can say when they are experiencing the system in a way that was different from how it was intended to be experienced. So there are not many people who can voice out their feedback or conflict with the system. So that is why there is no grievance redressal mechanism, and this is one of the important takeaways of top-down governance. What conventional notions of a high-tech city is challenged in the discussion around urbanscapes? This is something that is also fairly straightforward. The two very overtly challenged conceptions in the smart city lecture are the notion of a smart city, in that notion of what counts as smart is questioned, and the notion of a wired city, in that the notion of what counts as a connected city and a wired city is also questioned. Which of the following is most reflective of Le Corbusier's design of the city for 3 million? If you look closely at the smart city lecture, this answer is also straightforward, but essentially, um, Corbusier talks about evenness and order and sameness, and that is what is being challenged by a lot of people. So there is essentially a design that is being conceived that leaves very little room for randomness, for spontaneity, for organic growth of any kind, for disorder in the way that Richard Sennett talks about it, which is why the correct answer is a design that leaves very little room for randomness is what is reflected in Corbusier's City for 3 million. And then the last question is about Richard Sennett's version of a more desirable version of a city, which is an open city, which is characterized by a dense urban space where citizens have agency and ownership to make what they can with the space around them, that they can move freely and they can act with autonomy and they can be safe. So that is about it for the second assignment. And again, Discussion forum is open for any questions around this. The third one is where Google stops. The third one is where it starts to get more oriented towards um, digital data and algorithmic surveillance. So the first one is the first question talks about which of these reflects a right-based approach. This is a multi-select question. This again, you should be able to draw from the lectures or a simple secondary internet research should help you with this. So yeah, this is the National Rural Health Mission is based in a rights-based approach, and the National Food Security Act is also a rights-based approach. Um, then the second one is a scenario that talks about you visit talks about surveillance, the kind of surveillance, and I think there was a question about this in the discussion forum, so I will discuss this in some detail. You visit a store based on your monthly purchase, you receive credit points. They also offer you a special discount on your birthday. This data about your choices in clothing and footwear would then go on to feed an algorithm to induce coerced buying. The answer is dyadic surveillance, and I'll tell you why. The reason is refractive surveillance talks about drawing data and feeding other systems. Um, Other systems, like for instance, if they perhaps sell this data to a partner brand, and then that partner brand starts targeting. That would be an example of refractive surveillance. However, based on this scenario alone, your data is being used in a closed loop, is being used for you to be, for you to come back and buy more from the same buyer. But let's say if this data was connected to, let's say, your spending habits, and then there was a certain kind of discount that was offered to you based on another product that is not sold in this store, then that would be refractive surveillance. So dyadic surveillance has boundaries. It is within the same system and it is direct, which is what is happening here. Kranzberg's laws of technology, there's a question on it, specifically the second law, which is every technical innovation seems to require additional technical advances in order to make it fully effective. Without, I think the options make it a fairly easy to understand answer, but I will say more about it anyway. The law talks about how newer technological systems don't exist in silos. They require support from additional existing technological systems to uh, move along a certain trajectory, which is best reflected in the option that talks about the rubber tire infrastructure that started flourishing because there was an active automobile industry. So if you don't have tires, you don't have cars. And the innovation between these two industries was happening simultaneously. So that's the best option to speak directly to this particular law. The fourth one talks about data biases. It's a recall question and asks who talks about it. It's Kathy O'Neill, and specifically in predictive policing. The fifth one is based on your understanding of facial recognition software so far, which is exclusively spoken about in Kathy O'Neill's work, and the lecture also picks up examples across different cases. Which of these would you consider a feature of social facial recognition software? It's used as a tool for surveillance. That is the correct option. The ideological belief that all complex social, political, and economic problems can be solved through improved technology, algorithms, or gadgets reflects an ideology of technological solutionism, which is that technology alone can be the solution. That's what it reflects. This is different from determinism, in that determinism attributes a very causal uh, effect, cause effect relationship to any technology. So if technological determinism is what is being spoken about, then you would talk about how a certain outcome is going to occur for sure solely based on the fact that technology was introduced. So there is a certain cause effect that's associated with determinism, which is not what is being spoken about here. Solutionism, technological solutionism, is more uh, talking about how there is a blind belief that anything and everything can be solved through tinkering with technology and the introduction of technology. Robert Moses is a case again that's discussed in the lectures. Robert Moses was a well-known city planner in the United States of America between the 1920s and 1970s. One of his many designs includes a flyover that discourages the movement of vehicles like buses, trucks. So you immediately know that there is a class-based division that's happening, right? Keeping in mind the period in which it was designed, if you dig a little further, you'll also know that class is also deeply connected to other identities. So, but based on the based on the options alone, you would have to select the correct answer would be it was done to permit access to a specific class, which is basically a car owning or an automobile owning class of people. The next question talks about, it's a very direct question. It asks which author talks about a digital poorhouse. It's Virginia Eubanks in Automating Inequality. Consider an app that lets you report on tenants' activities within your neighborhood. There are people within your neighborhood who report robberies. However, very quickly, people of the neighborhood start logging delivery partners, visitors, and guests' activities. What is this an example of? This is an example of technology as a means of surveillance. On the basis of your understanding of the facial recognition software examples discussed so far, which of these would you consider a feature? It is also an opaque system. Not only is it used for surveillance, it is also an opaque system. So there are the algorithmic decision making that happens behind the facial recognition software, especially the one that Kathy O'Neill speaks about. It's not visible, it's not decodable, but it does give out a decision that people act on. So it's an opaque system. So that brings us to a close on the assignments. If there are any other specific questions, I'm happy to take them on the discussion forum, and we will most likely also have another live session next week, and we can discuss specific cases or extra references if that is helpful. But that's it for now. I will also discuss the fourth assignment in the next live session and just do an overview of the course in general. And we can have a chat about what the exam will look like and what kind of reference material uh, might be useful. But I can stick around for another 5 minutes if anyone has any questions. If not, I think we can end this session and we can continue to communicate on the discussion forum. Thank you.